Hey guys, Booligan here with Booligan Shooting Sports. And it's pretty hard to describe what I'm bringing you guys today, but I will do my best. This is a 1980s vintage AR of some sort. Let's talk a little bit about how I got this thing, why it's missing things like a stock, and a little bit of the history of early to mid 1980s custom AR building. I regularly peruse Utah Gun Exchange several times a day, too many times a day, most of the time. But Utah Gun Exchange is my local website that I use to find people that are selling their guns. And you can usually find some pretty interesting stuff on there. You can also find a lot of hot garbage, just garbage deals on ammo, garbage deals on guns, stock Smith & Wesson Sport 15s that are selling for like $1,400. But occasionally you'll find some interesting stuff. And honestly, a lot of the stuff on my wall is from Utah Gun Exchange. So I came across an ad that had this upper fitted on this KE Arms KP15 lower and what was listed as a spare Bushmaster XM15 lower. And the price on it was fantastic, just stupid cheap, almost to the point where I was a little suspicious. But I threw a little caution to the wind and went and picked it up. The KE Arms KP15 lower is nothing special. It is a standard KP15 lower. And I'll build something with it, kind of have it thrown together as like a spare parts AR right now. But this thing is what I really had to go get it. He had it listed as a Colt upper with, and as I said, it was listed as a spare Bushmaster XM15 lower. It's not a Bushmaster XM15 lower at all. What it is it is a Sendra lower. That's Sendra. That is a name that very old gun guys may recognize. Anyone younger than about 35 probably won't. But what Sendra was, in the early 1980s, if you wanted an AR-15, you were buying factory. You were buying a Colt. That's pretty much it. That's kind of where your options began and ended. If you wanted to build your own, or if you wanted to customize it, your options were very few and far between. You didn't exactly have, let me get an Arrow, or let me get a PSA, or let me get a Rock River, or let me get this or that or this. You didn't have options like that. So what Sendra did, Sendra came onto the scene and started selling uppers, lowers. I don't believe they actually sold any complete guns, but they did sell certainly lowers. So what the seller told me on this, and there's going to be a nice little segue here into the bullshittery of sellers and how it's not necessarily a bad thing. I always love a good story, even if that story is almost entirely bullshit, completely unverifiable, and maybe true, maybe not, but it makes for a fun story. So what the seller said is, obviously, these two were mated together when he got them. And where he obtained them was from the Alaskan State Troopers or Alaskan Highway Patrol or something in Alaska. And that's why it has this finish on it, which is really hard to demonstrate what the hell this is. He told me it was like an Arctic warfare finish for high gripability and to protect the aluminum underneath. Aluminum doesn't rust, so I don't really know what this coating would be protecting, but what it looks like is either bed liner, like a wrinkle finish bed liner, or a wrinkled finish like paint. It might be a powder coat. I honestly couldn't tell you. But it's fitted to the receivers, to the barrel, and it's just completely bizarre. So talking about the lower again briefly, he said it was a Bushmaster XM15. He probably got that because it says XM15. but there isn't actually any marking on here that says Bushmaster. It wasn't until I looked into it a little bit more and started tracking down the serial number, which is 3 digits long. This is a 3-digit serial number. This is a very, very early build. That I realized, oh no, this isn't a Bushmaster at all. This is a Sendra XM15A1. And that things made a lot more sense at that point. So that's the lower. It's a mil-spec lower. It's got a comfy little grip here. The reason it didn't come with a stock, and the reason why I don't have a stock on it, is because this is a commercial buffer tuber, commercial receiver extension, and I don't have any of those. I strictly work with mil-spec stuff. So when a commercial one kind of comes across my desk, I don't have anything to put on it. And frankly, I don't think that adds or detracts from this. I think it's par for the course for this ridiculous build to be fitted without a stock. You could tell really that it is most likely a Sendra buffer tube, because it's hard to tell, but it is purple. Sendra anodizing tended to be purple. Especially now, and this thing is purple as hell. The upper probably is a Colt A1 upper. You'll notice it does have the teardrop forward assist. It does not have a shell deflector, and it's missing the carry handle. Okay, why? Why is it missing the carry handle? Well, you have to realize this was like 1983, 1984, and the flat top AR receiver as we know it didn't exist. Having a Picatinny rail on the top here was not really a thing at this point in time. The military certainly didn't have it at this point. So if you wanted to mount a scope on top of your AR-15, you had 2 options. Your first option was to get a carry handle scope mount, which really raised that height over bore out of control. It was crazy and just wasn't great. You were really getting kind of a chin weld on there to get your sight picture. Or you cut off the carry handle and you drilled and tapped the upper receiver for some Weaver mounts, because Picatinny mount was not the choice here at the time. And then you mount your scope to it. In this case, a Bushnell Sport View. It's a 3-9 by 40 or by 32. And it's fine. It's a scope. It's a 1980s scope that appears to be period correct. We look at this and we're thinking like, Bubba, no, what did you do to this gun? But the reality of this is this probably was custom built for some law enforcement up in Alaska or elsewhere, or for a sportsman. But this probably was a decent custom build at the time, because this is kind of what you did. You know, you didn't have those options. So if you want to mount a scope, you want to, oh yeah, perfect. Let's just chop off that carry handle and go from there. Moving to the handguard, it has a triangular carbine length handguard, because of course it has a triangular carbine length handguard. Other kind of handguards weren't really prominent at the time, especially not in carbine length. And, you know, if you're in the Alaskan state troopers, you've got your gloves on, so you need to have a big, comfortable thing. Way better than those little skinny tubes, because you didn't have M4 handguards. You had, I think they're like XM177 handguards, which were narrow. They were pretty skinny, so you want a big, chunky guy here. You do have this isn't a cut down front sight post. This is a factory aftermarket piece at the time, and a thin profile barrel. There's no this isn't exactly an M4 profile barrel. This is probably a .625. Might even be narrower than that, but it's a 5.56 barrel, but it's a, you know, kind of skinny guy there, and it's finished with this DTA mill brake up front. I don't know if I'm aging myself here a little bit, but like when I'd go to gun shows, there was always that guy playing the VHS tapes of dudes just ripping machine guns. There was this series called Rock and Roll, and there was like volumes 1 through 4. And on Rock and Roll volume 1, there's like a 20-minute long commercial for this DTA mill brake. Keep in mind, this was like back in like 1983, 1984. These were really good muzzle brakes at the time. They're ported up top They're ported at the front. They have like a special multi-chamber design so that you get flatter shooting, you get less muzzle flash, but it's not a flash hider, so it doesn't technically meet that definition. They're super, super cool. This is actually like kind of one of my favorite pieces on this whole absolutely ridiculous gun. So, and it's period correct. So I have every reason to believe that, yeah, this is roughly as it came. There's stuff about it that makes sense. Like it has an extended rear pin, so that you can easily remove it by hand. Also, because of this old receiver type, or this old receiver extension, there's no nub holding the buffer in place. So you have to get creative when installing that. It's a standard mil-spec trigger. There's nothing too crazy there. And it even came with a proper Colt magazine that has the most tired spring that I have ever seen. The spring is so tired in this thing that it won't trigger the last round bolt hold open. It's just bizarre. And it really kind of stresses that whole idea that like Bubba has always existed, and whether this is a Bubba build or whether this was a professionally done law enforcement grade build, who knows? There's no way to know for sure. There's no markings on here that indicate like a unit number or indicate a rack number. Maybe that was on the stock. Who knows? Where did the stock go? How did the stock get lost sometime in the last like 36 years that this thing has existed? It's just completely bizarre. And I don't really know what to do with it, but I had to buy it because it was so cheap and so just off the wall that it called to me. I will say, I do have a friend who really wants this lower. The reason being, it is a pre-ban lower. It was obviously made before 1994, which means certain states that restrict you to owning pre-ban AR receivers. It's a very wanted item in that regard. He may or may not want the upper. I don't know. That's sort of up in the air. But the upper is just one of the most off-the-wall parts about it. And I look at it, and I kind of think that I want to build... You guys remember in Return of the Jedi, the Rebels had some AR-based rifles? I think I might want to build one of those, at least out of the upper. It already has the carry handle chopped off, so I just have to remove the weaver rails and add all the little greebles and things on there to make it look Star Wars-esque. I could 3D print and design some stuff that could actually be a pretty fun project to do, but it would almost be appropriate because that's how they built them for Return of the Jedi. So that might be what I do with this upper. I don't know. The whole thing may be going to a new owner if he does decide that he wants it. But I just had to get this thing because it's such an interesting piece of early civilian, like commercial build AR history. And the story was too good to pass up on. I mean, it's just completely ridiculous. I'd say I love this thing, but I really don't. It is unpleasant to look at. It is unpleasant to touch. I haven't shot it. I may or may not even shoot it at any time in the near future. I mean, it would work, I'm sure, but yeah, it's just kind of an interesting thing, an interesting product of its time, and I'm happy to have the opportunity to share it with you all today. I hope you enjoyed this long rambling video about the bullshittery of gun sellers, about early 1980s AR builds, about Sendra. One thing I didn't even mention about Sendra, you know why you don't hear about Sendra anymore? Because he was basically set up by the federal government with some weapons charges that eventually went away. And then in 1986, when the Hughes Amendment was about to take place, he tried to register a bunch of his lowers as machine guns, and the government said no for one reason or another. And he got so frustrated with the whole thing that he actually took his whole operation and he sold it. He sold the whole operation to a company that would ultimately become Bushmaster. So I guess in a way, this is a Bushmaster XM15, just before Bushmaster XM15s existed at the time. Kind of interesting, kind of a weird little segue into the history of Sendra and why you don't hear about them anymore, and why this is just kind of an interesting part of the collection for now. As always, thanks for watching.